Vox, 21st of June 2023, how near China's hegemonic rule and the loss of Russia. President Richard Nixon visited China 50 years ago to undermine the Soviet Union and prevent the two nations from becoming overly close. America is currently dealing with a new Cold War in which China and Russia have forged a close alliance, alarming the Biden administration. The U.S. sees itself as in different ways in competition with both nations. In the face of a disastrous Russian invasion, Washington provides Ukraine with substantial financial and military support. The elite of Washington's foreign policy is likely even more worried by China's emergence as a global force that can challenge the U.S. Although a war between the U.S. and China is not inescapable, the hostility between the two nations is now so high that Washington must contend with Moscow's relationship with Beijing. But how closely related are China and Russia? Analysts believe China and Russia view their relationship with the United States as an existential war. It resulted in a relationship that had elements of the military, diplomatic, and economic types. We are unsure of the entire scope of the relationship's depth because Russia and China are closed and autocratic, despite Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin having met 40 times in the past 10 years. Patricia Kim, a researcher at the Brookings Institution, has extensively monitored the relationship between the two nations. What's significant is the fact that China is cooperating fully with Russia. And this has cost Beijing considerably in terms of its international reputation. It merely demonstrates how highly China regards Russia as a strategic ally. Is it a relationship with no limits? Is Russia China's junior partner? An explanation of their relationship. Putin visited Beijing for the Olympics 3 weeks before Russia invaded Ukraine. He and Xi jointly issued a statement announcing their no-limits friendship, demonstrating the growing ties between the two nations. That term was absent from the communiqué during the two presidents' second meeting this spring. Chinese diplomats have downplayed the connection partly to preserve their country's relations with Europe. The band has endured nonetheless. Yoon Sun, head of the China program at the Stimson Center, asserts that China would not abandon Russia but that this differs significantly from the no-limit partnership. Secretary of State Antony Blinken forewarned China in February of the dangers of aggressively arming and aiding Russia in Ukraine. China has so far refuted claims that it delivered any weapons to Russia, but Ukraine emphasizes that Chinese components have been found in Russian weapons that have been seized. Wide-ranging international sanctions against Russia have led it to seek assistance from China, the second-largest economy in the world. According to Sun, the two countries' economic ties have unquestionably improved since the commencement of the Ukraine war. For the first half of this year, trade between the two nations totaled $93.8 billion, a roughly 40% increase from the previous year. Chinese exports of semiconductors are particularly prized. According to the Wall Street Journal, integrated circuit shipments to Russia were valued at $179 million in 2022 against just $74 million in 2021. Trade is unbalanced. Only 2% of China's exports to Russia were produced last year, yet both nations need one another. Ivan Konopathy, an expert at the Cheese Think Group, claims that China needs energy and military technology from Russia and anything to divert American attention. While many of China's and Russia's strategic goals may coincide, that does not imply they all do. One contrast can be seen in the limitations of Chinese backing for Russia's conflict in Ukraine. Another is that China still sees India as a competition while Russia remains a close ally, and arms supplier, to India. Russia and China both dominate the world in quite different ways. The idea that Russia is China's junior partner has become widespread recently. Ganapati, who sat on the National Security Council from 2018 to 2021, claims that Trump administration officials used the phrase junior partner to disparage both nations in their remarks. He explained that China does not want to be seen as the more dominant partner for its reasons, such as its claim to be a developing country. And we knew Russia would despise the inference, primarily out of pride. To cause conflict in that connection, describing them in that way was necessary. Russia may be seen as a junior partner in some aspects, both monetarily and in terms of its escalating isolation from the rest of the world. However, according to Alexander Gabuev, director of the Carnegie Russia-Eurasia Center, it is preferable to consider each nation as a vital force with its capacity to shape events. When it can, China seeks methods to profit from what Russia does. Russian foreign policy is a natural disaster, it's a storm. You are powerless over it. You can adjust to it and then take advantage of some consequences. On the Sinica podcast, he noted that it would be like putting the wind farms at the edge of this typhoon and using them to generate electricity. This is primarily about Chinese pragmatism. There is a shared alignment of many interests, and that's growing, Gabuev told me. But there is more of a bond between Russia and China than just the assistance each nation gives to the other. The deeper problem may be that China and Russia are more at risk from a US-dominated global economy and Washington's military preeminence as the world's police officer than has been openly acknowledged. This was mostly done before the Biden administration. It dates back to President George W. Bush's regime change strategy during the War on Terrorism. The United States adopts this policy in Iraq and Afghanistan, and it's one that nobody knows the limits of a prerogative to engage in forcible regime change and militarized democracy promotion, said Georgetown University professor Daniel Nixon. The U.S. denies plotting color revolutions in former USSR states, as claimed by Russia. The Chinese leadership was alarmed by President Obama's support for the popular revolutions that ousted autocrats in the Middle East in 2011 and subsequent operations in Libya and Syria. According to Nixon, there is a perception that the U.S. is merely hostile to their regimes. Most likely a result of the perception that the United States fundamentally rejects the legitimacy of the rule. It will also take actions that pose a threat to the regime. The U.S. believes that its participation is motivated by noble goals. Blinken told reporters this week while visiting Beijing, "One of the critical things for me to undertake on this trip was to disabuse our Chinese hosts of the notion that we aim to constrain them economically. So I tried to ensure we were extremely clear about what we were doing and weren't doing." The upholding and updating of the rules-based order has been the Biden administration's principal focus, according to Blinken. They frequently refer to the equilibrium the U.S. seeks globally with this phrase, but many other nations, not just China and Russia, hear hypocrisy. Ganapati said, "It sounds good to us and our closest allies. The closest allies, though, are already on board, so it is irrelevant. The rest of the world does not concur. They believe the United States creates, modifies, and chooses the rules to benefit itself." What this means for U.S. ties with other countries. Present-day U.S. foreign policy is mainly viewed through the lens of potential conflict with China. The hasty discussions in Washington about how to respond to Beijing's spy balloons, for example, seem to be positioning the U.S. for battle rather than reasoned discussions about addressing the world's challenges. The U.S.'s global position cannot be primarily focused on opposing China. This also relates to the more general debate about Ukraine between the West and non-West. Many central and middling powers are adamant about remaining neutral. According to Kim, a researcher at the Brookings Institution, U.S. officials must consider why Chinese and Russian accusations of Western hypocrisy and hegemony resonate in many parts of the world and how they might address these grievances. She explained that they view each other as essential partners in undermining what they see as a Western-dominated global order. However, given that Russia still considers itself at war with Ukraine, its confidence in China may act as a check on its power. There is an acknowledgement that China might be able to contribute more positively.